God confirmed his choice of Saul for king over Israel 3 times, with 3 separate anointings or proclamations of Saul for the office. In Saul's first act as leader of the Israelites, Saul demonstrated all the qualities that God saw in him that qualified him to be the leader of God's people. Saul called on all the tribes to remember their covenant with God and their brother tribes to come to the aid of Jabesh-Gilead. He submitted to the authority of Samuel as God's prophet. He showed mercy to those who didn't want to accept him as king. He gave credit to God for their victory over the Ammonites. However, Saul's character flaws would soon overpower his good character traits. Saul tended to be impatient and to act impetuously. His rash actions would lead to God rejecting him as king. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is the Promise of Rest. Although Saul's first action as king was to rescue the residents of Jabesh-Gilead from the Ammonites, the primary task that God gave him as king over Israel was to deliver Israel from the Philistines. God had revealed this task in his instructions to Samuel about anointing Saul as king. 1 Samuel 9:16. Tomorrow about this time I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him commander over my people Israel, that he may save my people from the hand of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people, because their cry has come to me. The oppression of Israel by the Philistines dated back to before the time of Samson. God had sent Samson to begin the process of deliverance from the Philistines. Samson beat back the Philistines, causing them to be wary of pushing Israel too far. However, under the next judge Eli, the Philistines once more stepped up their oppressive acts until they eventually captured the Ark of God and destroyed Shiloh, the place that God had chosen to place his name in Israel. God's glory even departed from Israel for a time until the rise of Samuel. Samuel drove the Philistines out of Israel when he became judge over Israel. However, the Philistines once again came back to oppress Israel. One of the ways that the Philistines exerted control over Israel was that they had virtually disarmed the Israelites. The Philistines had control over the blacksmiths, who forged metal implements including swords and sharpened the existing weapons. 1 Samuel 13:19. Now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. It appears that Saul, shortly after his victory over the Ammonites, began making plans and preparations for delivering Israel from the hand of the Philistines. The opening verse in 1 Samuel chapter 13 is ambiguous about the time frame, and many different explanations have been offered about what time interval is being described. One thing we can conclude is that the events in this chapter happened early in the reign of Saul, most likely in the 2nd year. 1 Samuel 13:1 and 2. A son of a year is Saul in his reigning, yea, 2 years he hath reigned over Israel. And Saul chooseth for himself 3,000 men out of Israel, and 2,000 are with Saul in Michmash, and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 have been with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin, and the remnant of the people he hath sent each to his tents. In the earlier battle against the Ammonites, 330,000 men from every tribe of Israel answered Saul's call for warriors. It may be that after holding the men with him for perhaps as long as a year at Gilgal, where they had gathered after the battle, Saul chose 3,000 men to remain. 19th century theologians Keel and Delitzsch explain, "But as no other summoning together of the people has been mentioned before, except to the war upon the Ammonites at Jabesh, 1 Samuel 11:6 and 7, where all Israel gathered together, and at the close of which Samuel had called the people and their king to Gilgal, 1 Samuel 11:14, The assumption is a very probable one, that it was there at Gilgal, after the renewal of the monarchy, that Saul formed a resolution at once to make war upon the Philistines, and selected 3,000 fighting men for the purpose out of the whole number that were collected together, and then dismissed the remainder to their homes. Saul kept 2,000 men with him at Michmash, which was 7 miles north of Jerusalem. The other 1,000 were with his son Jonathan near their hometown of Gibeah. Although this sounds like Saul was dividing his forces, Michmash and Gibeah were not far apart. Saul's actual target was the Philistine garrison at Geba. Jonathan attacked the garrison, starting the war. When the Philistines heard of the attack, Saul commanded that the shofar be blown throughout Israel to once more gather the army to Gilgal. It must have been a frightening time for Saul. The much larger Philistine army gathered to Michmash, where Saul had originally camped, to make war against the meager 3,000 men Saul had retained from his army. 1 Samuel 13:5. Then the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and encamped in Michmash to the east of Bet-aven. The Israelites were so frightened that instead of joining Saul in Gilgal, they hid away anywhere they could find. A few of them fled across the Jordan to the tribal lands of Gad and Manasseh. Only a few of the men joined Saul in Gilgal, but those who did so were on the verge of fleeing. This planned attack on the Philistines was not going how Saul expected that it would go. 1 Samuel 13:7 and 8. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Then he waited 7 days, according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. Verse 8 tells us that Samuel had instructed Saul to wait 7 days for him. It is very likely that God had given Samuel this plan to attack the Philistines, and had shared them with Saul at the time of his selection as king. It was at that time that Samuel had instructed Saul to wait 7 days for him at Gilgal. 1 Samuel 10:8. You shall go down before me to Gilgal, and surely I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait, till I come to you and show you what you should do. These must have been the hardest days of Saul's life. We can almost see him pacing and hear him calling out for Samuel to hurry up and arrive. Saul waited almost long enough, but not quite. When the 7 days were almost over, and Saul saw the people losing heart and beginning to scatter away, he took things into his own hands and began to bring the offerings and sacrifices. 1 Samuel 13:9 and 10. So Saul said, "Bring a burnt offering and peace offerings here to me." And he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering that Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. Saul's fears about the imminent attack by the Philistines and his impatience to bring the offering to the Lord before more of the people fled led to his downfall. When Samuel arrived, it seemed that Saul was not at all repentant for failing to wait for Samuel. In fact, Saul almost brags about his actions and seeks to place Samuel in the wrong for arriving too late. 1 Samuel 13:11 and 12. And Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering." The consequence of Saul's fears, impetuousness, and self-justification would be the loss of his kingdom and, ultimately, the inability of Saul to deliver the children of Israel from the Philistines. 1 Samuel 13:13 and 14. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." When Saul deviated from the instructions given to him by God through the prophet Samuel, the whole plan fell apart. God would have destroyed the Philistines in such a way that all Israel would have known that it was by God's hand that they were delivered. However, Saul did not follow the instructions. Now the true deliverance would be delayed until the time of David, the one who would be a man after God's own heart. In the meantime, the war with the Philistines was still on the horizons. The Israelites were demoralized, some hiding in rocks and caves, others fleeing from the mighty forces of the Philistines. Only 600 men remained with Saul. 1 Samuel 13:15. Then Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin, and Saul numbered the people present with him, about 600 men. It is interesting that when David flees from Saul's wrath, that 600 men follow him into exile, accomplishing mighty works. While Saul remained at Gilgal, Samuel went up to the front lines at Gibeah, where Jonathan waited with his men. Meanwhile, the Philistines sent out 3 forces to punish the people of Israel. One force went north toward Ophrah, a second west toward Bet-Horon, and the third east toward the valley of Zeboim in the Jordan Valley. This left the garrison at Michmash vulnerable to attack. Saul, with only 600 men and now uncertain how to proceed, summoned the high priest Ahijah to join him. 1 Samuel 14:2-3. And Saul was sitting in the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree which is in Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men. Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, was wearing an ephod. But the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Jonathan saw the departing forces of the Philistines and had left camp to look for an opportunity to take the garrison. He and his faithful armor-bearer went to spy out the garrison and to test if God would deliver the Philistines into his hands. 1 Samuel 14:8-10. Then Jonathan said, "Very well, let us cross over to these men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say thus to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand still in our place and not go up to them. But if they say thus, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign to us." The Philistines challenged Jonathan to come up to them. Jonathan was jubilant because that meant that God had delivered the Philistines into his hand. Jonathan crawled up the rocks on the side of the garrison with his armor-bearer right behind him. The two of them quickly slaughtered 20 men. 1 Samuel 14:13-15. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor-bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan. And as he came after him, his armor-bearer killed them. That first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. And there was trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and the raiders also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it was a very great trembling. As Jonathan acted in faith, the earth quaked, and fear overcame the raiders, causing them to flee from Jonathan. Saul and his entire camp saw the Philistines flee. Wondering what had caused the Philistines to flee, Saul conducted a roll call of the camp and discovered that Jonathan and his armor-bearer were the only 2 people missing from the camp. Saul then decided to inquire of the Lord through the high priest what action he should take. However, before the inquiry could be completed, Saul had already made up his mind and stopped the inquiry. 1 Samuel 14:19-20. Now it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all the people who were with him assembled, and they went to battle. And indeed every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was very great confusion. As Saul went out to battle, all the people who had hidden in the rocks and caves came out to join in the battle. God gave the victory to Israel. For some reason, known only to Saul, he forbade the men of his fighting force from eating anything until evening. 1 Samuel 14:24. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had placed the people under oath, saying, "Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. Saul probably made this oath at the time that he interrupted the priest inquiring of the Lord what to do, and decided on his own that Israel would pursue the Philistines. Saul had instituted this prohibition against eating with an oath and a curse, followed by the condition that they couldn't eat until he had gotten vengeance. God gave Israel the victory, but Saul made the battle all about him. He was seeking vengeance, not God. Further, Saul's prohibition weakened his army. Jonathan, who began the battle and led the fight, was not present when Saul made his oath. Jonathan was hungry, and when given the opportunity to eat, he did so. 1 Samuel 14:27. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. Therefore he stretched out the end of the rod that was in his hand and dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his countenance brightened. Jonathan ate the honey and was immediately strengthened. The strengthening sustenance of the honey, though, was denied to the army of Israel. In Psalms 19 and 119, David compares the Torah, God's word, to honey. When a person takes in the Torah, that person is immediately strengthened. Saul's prohibition on food was like a prohibition on the Torah. It served only Saul, weakened the people, and caused them to sin. When evening finally came and the people were allowed to eat, they were so hungry that they broke God's commandment that they were not supposed to eat blood. 1 Samuel 14:31-33. Now they had driven back the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon. So the people were very faint, and the people rushed on the spoil and took sheep, oxen, and calves and slaughtered them on the ground. And the people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, saying, "Look, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." So he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone to me this day." Saul used the stone as the altar for the people to slaughter their animals and drain the blood from the carcasses properly before allowing the people to eat the meat. Later that evening, Saul, caught up in the victory, proposed that Israel attack the Philistines again that night. He brought his proposal to the priest, who inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer. 1 Samuel 14:37. So Saul asked counsel of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. Saul concluded that the Lord didn't answer because someone in the camp had committed a sin. He vowed to find who had sinned and put that person to death, even if it was his son Jonathan, which of course it was. When the lot revealed that Jonathan had tasted the honey when Saul had cursed anyone who ate, before Saul had avenged himself on the Philistines, Saul intended to carry out his oath and kill Jonathan. It was at this point that Saul began to lose the support of the people. They knew that Jonathan's faith had led to the rout of the Philistines. They refused to allow Saul to kill Jonathan. 1 Samuel 14:45. But the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has accomplished this great deliverance in Israel? Certainly not. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Saul had sworn that Jonathan would die for eating the honey. The people swore that Jonathan would not die, because he was the one through whom God brought the victory. So why did the lot single out Jonathan as the one who had sinned? Keel and Dalish reasoned that in the case of a command backed up with an oath that was not commanded by God, the guilt for violating the command could be either on the one who transgresses the command or on the one who issued the command without divine authority. They conclude that Saul was the guilty party in this case. The people had conscientiously obeyed the command, but Jonathan had transgressed it without being aware of it. For this, Saul was about to punish him with death in order to keep his oath. But the people opposed it. They not only pronounced Jonathan innocent because he had broken the king's command unconsciously, but they also exclaimed that he had gained the victory for Israel with God. In this fact, Jonathan's victory, there was a divine verdict, and Saul could not fail to recognize now that it was not Jonathan, but he himself who had sinned, and through his arbitrary and despotic command had brought guilt upon Israel, on account of which God had given him no reply. Throughout the remainder of Saul's reign, he led Israel in the fight against the Philistines. In addition to the Philistines, Saul fought battles against all the nations around Israel. 1 Samuel 14:47 and 48. So Saul established his sovereignty over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the people of Ammon, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he harassed them, and he gathered an army and attacked the Amalekites and delivered Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. Again and again, Israel's enemies attacked and sought to destroy Israel. Saul always fought back and delivered Israel from her enemies, but they kept coming back. Saul, whom God had raised up to deliver Israel from the Philistines, was unable to complete the task, even though God had originally given him the opportunity to do so. Saul's failure to wait for God ruined God's battle plans. Then his rash oath hindered Israel from achieving complete victory. Saul also lost the unquestioning obedience of the people. This will lead to another failing in Saul in the next account in the Bible when Saul encounters the Amalekites. I'm Brenda Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.